can get started. Welcome everyone to our program. I'm Christine Biglin,
And I'm Erin Bates.
and we're librarians with St. Mary's County Library. We appreciate you being here tonight, not only in sharing an hour of your time with us, but also in coming to talk about raising our kids to be anti-racist. This can certainly be a complex and emotionally filled topic. Erin and I are not experts on racism, but we want to advance the conversation about it. We are also not experts on parenting, although we are both experienced at it. Actually, between the two of us, we have 9 children. But all that really means is that we appreciate how unique each child is, and we recognize that you, as the caregiver, are the expert on the child in your care. What we want to do tonight is give you a toolbox and ideas on how you can customize those tools to best fit you and your child, so you can have meaningful conversations together about race and racism.
So let me tell you what we have planned for tonight. Christine's going to be talking a little bit about adult books. That is kind of a good place to get started. It gets us looking at our own feelings and our own thoughts on the topic and kind of reflect on that before we start trying to engage with our children and have conversations. I'm going to go over some of the children's books, ways we can use those as conversation starters, and then a couple other tools that we have to help raise an anti-racist child. And then we have some guest speakers here to show some really great places in St. Mary's County that you can take your children and kind of further that conversation.
Let me introduce our guests. First, we'll talk to Karen Stone from the Museum Division of Recreation and Parks. Next, we'll talk to Dr. Jeffrey Coleman from St. Mary's College of Maryland. He is the director of the newly finished Commemorative to Enslaved Peoples of Southern Maryland on the college campus. And we'll finish by talking to Peter Friesen, who is the Director of Education at Historic St. Mary's City. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. So just a quick note, we do have chat. We do have the chat feature available if you have any technical trouble, which I had for just 1 second there. And we also have the Q&A feature. If you have any questions during our presentation, please type them in the chat. And if you want to direct it to a specific one of us, you can put our name in there as well, so we know who to address the question to. So let's get started. Jill is our tech host, and she'll be monitoring the chat if you have any difficulties. So if you can please start the slideshow, Jill. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now the premise we want to begin with is that you cannot pass on something you don't have. So we do have to start with ourselves, and this can be a little painful because it involves looking in the mirror, but it's really a crucial step in making this successful for you and your child. So the first book that I'd like to mention is called How to Be an Anti-Racist by Abram. And there are some 2 really great concepts that he has in his introduction of this book. One is that not racist is not a thing. And his quote here is that one either allows racial inequities to persevere as a racist or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. There is no in-between safe space of not racist. The claim of not racist neutrality is really a mask for racism. And that can be a little hard to face sometimes. We see our person in the mirror and he's holding 2 tags. And I'd like to skip to the point at the bottom that it is emotional to use these labels, but we should keep in mind that they are not a permanent tattoo. The labels are more like peelable name tags that we can put on and take off. So it's changeable, and you can spend some self-examination time and decide, how you feel about particular things. Being an anti-racist requires persistent self-awareness, constant self-criticism, and regular self-examination. So that's hard, but it's well worthwhile. And it pays off in our relationship with our children. Slide, please. We can find that anti-racism ideas fit in with other common ideals that we're already talking to our kids about. Most faith traditions and moral codes support the idea of treating each other with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. And if we look at American patriotism, the ideals that we have in our Declaration of Independence is that we view all people as created equal and our Pledge of Allegiance is striving toward liberty and justice for all. Next, please. So I have some books to recommend for adults. This is not a complete list. These are ones that I chose to read in like my self-examination period that I can really recommend. First of all, on the right-hand side is The Hate You Give. This is a fiction book by Angie Thomas. It's also got a movie version, so that's a very accessible way to get this story. Fiction is a great way to go because you see a person's story and it helps you relate to it on a very personal level. Just below that is Just Mercy, which is mostly an autobiography by Brian Stevenson. He founded the Equal Justice Initiative, which helps largely people on death row. And he has his stories in there. That is also a movie, which is really excellent. And then going around clockwise, the next is The Talk, Conversations About Race, Love, and Truth. This is a collection of essays that kind of help parents see different ways to relate to their kids. And in the middle on the bottom is 40 Ways to Raise a Non-Racist Child. And the title itself shows you how old this book is. It was published in 1996. And although that was so last century, unfortunately, we find ourselves in very similar times. So even though the title is dated, it should say Anti-Racist Child. The content is very good. It's got 40 chapters and it takes you through different age progressions of kids and gives you very practical ideas on how you can incorporate these ideas. And next to that on the left is this book is Antiracist. This is a new young adult book and the format is very easy. You can read it in just a few days because it's brief, it's very colorful. So it appealed to me, I liked it a lot. And it covers a lot of different topics in very accessible language. Next to that, and then the two that are left are heavier books. Like they take a more of a time commitment, but they're both really worthwhile. And I would actually recommend getting these as audiobooks. I found them easier to listen to than to read in print. So You Want to Talk About Race is written by a Black woman, and it covers lots of day-to-day circumstances that you'll find yourself in, and explains her point of view and why she reacts in certain ways. And it just helps in your understanding for me, it was a different perspective that I don't have. And the last one is Stamped from the Beginning by Dr. Abram. This is a very extensive history of racism in our country. And it's a really nice comprehensive look at that. In the center, you'll see the words Read Woke. That is a reading challenge that we're sponsoring at the library. It started in October. It goes through May. And the challenge is to read from a different perspective every month. So it might be hearing Black voices or Native Americans or LGBTQ. So it just helps you look around yourself and step out a little bit. So you can find these books and more at your library website, which is at the bottom. And if you have any trouble finding copies of these, please call the library in the afternoon because we staff our phone even though we're not open for visitors except for using the computers. And we can help you find copies of any of these. For instance, just if you happen to look up 40 Ways to Raise a Non-Racist Child, we don't have those in print because it's an older book. We are getting some. But it's available through Hoopla as a digital electronic book. So we can help you with those sorts of things. Okay, next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Erin.
Thanks, Christine. Okay, so as Christine mentioned, we are not experts here. And as a result, we do not have all the answers. I personally am still a parent exploring the question of how to raise my children to be anti-racist. And I really want to stress that tonight is not, and it should not be viewed as an all-inclusive tutorial for raising an anti-racist child. I personally feel that it can't be. I think that racism is a conversation best revisited again and again from many different angles over time, especially with our children as they grow. And most importantly, these conversations are not one size fit all. Every child and family is different. Who makes up your family unit how you live, what experiences you bring to the table. That's a huge part of what directs these conversations. And that's different from everyone. And we really need to honor those differences in ourselves and in the other families around us. So with that being said, we do have a few tools that we have available to use regardless of how old our children are. And I'm going to kind of go through those right now. The first one up on the slide, it says, be uncertain, ask questions, and seek answers together. It really is okay to not know the answers. Your kids are going to come to you, they're going to say things, they're going to have thoughts, and they're not going to have answers. And it's okay for you to not have them too. But what it's not okay to do is to not look for the answers. You want to be looking. So if you don't know, say you don't know. Use that as an opportunity to find the answers together. Another really great tool that we have is to be conscious in all of our choices. So that means seek out exposure, especially if everybody around you looks the same. It's important to go out and find opportunities to expose your children to differences. If that means taking an extra 30 minutes to go to a grocery store where you're going to see multiracial families, where you're going to see other cultures, it's worth the drive. You want to make sure that you model the values you want your children to have in the choices that you make. So you really have to be conscious as an adult what you're putting forward for your children to see, because they're looking at everything. One of the other great tools that we have, I like to say, you want to make talks about race and social justice routine. And I don't mean, every day at 5 o'clock you sit down and you talk about it. That means taking opportunities throughout life. It can be short bursts of conversation. And that's important because we want the act of talking about racism, about social justice, about the things that we see around us in the world to feel normal. When we don't talk about it, kids pick up on that and they start to think that that's something that they shouldn't talk about. And that's not a message that we want to be putting out there. And lastly, this is really important with kids, I think. We're here to facilitate the discussion. So what that means is use phrases like, I wonder, or I wonder what, or I wonder if, I wonder how. See what they notice. We want to facilitate the discussion, but we want your children to lead it. And the reason that's important is if you let them answer those questions, if you follow their lead, you meet them where they are in that particular moment. And that might not be where you expect it to be. And that's how we make sure that our conversations are developmentally appropriate. If we're letting them lead the discussion, if you're listening and letting them ask the questions, then you're never going to give them more information than they're ready to hear. All right, Jill, can you flip to the next slide for me, please? Okay, so we're going to start at the beginning because it really is never too early to start raising an anti-racist child. What we have up here, we start as infants. The studies show that children are not colorblind. That's a misconception. As early as 3 months old, our children are actually starting to see color. They're seeing the differences between one picture and another. They may not know what that means, but they are recognizing it and they are seeing it. So when we expose them to different images of different races, of different cultures, if we expose them to those in, whether they're in books, whether it's in the TV we watch, whether it's in the people they see at the park, they're recognizing that. And the point here at this age is about exposure. So when you have infants, the idea is just to let them see the world around them and see the whole of the world. You can do that with the images they look at, but it's also sound. The infants' brains actually differentiate and start to filter out different speech patterns and combinations that they don't hear frequently. So when we expose them to music in different languages, when we expose them to other sound combinations in other languages, those bits of information stay in their brain and they're available for them later when they encounter these things in life, when they start speaking. And that's why it doesn't even just have to be books. You can, music, lullabies, when you put music on to put your children to sleep, it doesn't always have to be in English. You can pick other languages and those things will be drawn into them and they will hold on to them. The other important thing about exposing our infants to some of these books I have up on the screen. Woke Baby. It's not even just Woke Baby. Brown Bear, which is a really common children's book. When you get to the end, what you see are all the children, and all those children you see are multiracial. They're diverse. So when you look at that page with your child, you don't even have to say anything. Those images are being absorbed, and it's amazing the other types of classical children's books that you can find that have those diverse opportunities for exposure. And we actually, one of the resources we're going to have in, we're going to send out some stuff afterwards. There are 2 websites that you can go to where you can put in books that you traditionally read, and it will give you other options that are similar, but that are more diverse. So you can actually actively go out and seek stories that are different from what you would normally come across. It's important because as you move forward into that toddler phase, when your kids start talking, if you haven't exposed them to the vocabulary that they need to have these conversations, then they're not going to be able to talk to you about it. So when you sit down and read books like Woke Baby, you're going to see language that you think, oh, well, this is not language for an infant. This is more advanced. The vocabulary is things even your children aren't using. The exposure is important. To learn to speak about them, you have to know the words, and it starts when they're babies. And the great thing is when you read to your child as an infant, they don't judge you. So if this is something that's new to you, if this is language that's new to you, this gives you an opportunity as a parent to practice, to get comfortable and to find your place, so that when you do have to have a conversation where you're going back and forth, you're not quite as uncomfortable. So this is a great opportunity as adults to get ourselves ready. And I think what we have coming up, Jill has a video clip for us that we're going to play. This is Jen and her son Ian, and she's actually going to read one of the books, where it's just a little clip of her reading to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like to read a book like this to an infant. And Ian is 3 months old. So,
Antiracist Baby by Abram X. Kendi and illustrated by Ashley Lukashevsky. Okay, to open our eyes to all the skin colors. They all look different from each other, but they all have nice, pretty skin colors. Ooh, that's right. See, we have different colors in the grass and what they're wearing here. And we also have different colors on their skin. All the different people. Yes, we don't pretend to be colorblind. And we also want to celebrate all our differences. So we have important things that are the same, and there's also important things that are different. We don't see some people as better or worse. We just celebrate everything that's diverse. It means all the ways that we're different. Look at all the babies and their families and how they all love each other. Yes, parents love the babies very much, just like we love you and you love us.
okay, so one of the things that we see Jen doing in that video is that she's not necessarily reading all of the text that's written on the page. And in some of these books, the language and the attention span of the children don't match up. So one of the great things that we can do as parents is choose not to read all the words. You want to choose what you put and what you read based on where your family is and where your child is. And so what we like to do is read the same book over and over again over a period of time. And that book will grow with your children, and the way you read it will change. So as they become more verbal, you're going to have an opportunity to have more back and forth conversation, because there's no rule that says that when we read to our kids, we have to read every word on the page. I think, Jill, I think we moved ahead on the slide. I think we should be back one. Yeah, okay, there we go. Thank you. All right, so we move into the toddler age range. That's when the language becomes important. This is when we want to start expanding on the vocabulary. Again, like I said, if they don't have the words, then they're not going to be able to talk about the concepts. And it's really important. I mean, even when it comes to potty training, we have books on the subject. We have books that talk about bodily functions and anatomy. And if that's something we can do with a toddler, then we can absolutely start to have conversations and introduce vocabulary about social justice and racism. Next, really, this is a time period where, like we said earlier, that you want to discover answers together. This age is where we build the foundation of trust in our line of communication with our kids. So once your toddler is verbal, they're going to start asking questions, and in their brains, they're tossing around ideas and trying to understand things. So sometimes the first question that comes out is not really what they're grappling with. So as a parent of a toddler, you want to be patient. You want to follow the thread of the conversation. Sometimes when we get something that feels like an uncomfortable question from a kid, our natural reaction is to redirect the conversation, especially if they're asking questions in an environment where we feel like, oh my gosh, other people are listening. I don't want them to hear my child say this. I think that what you need to remember is to let that conversation flow naturally. Toddlers don't have filters, but they also exist in a constant state of uncertainty. So they are processing everything that they see, trying to understand it. And all of life is a puzzle for them. So as parents of toddlers, when it comes to talking about social justice, racism, colors of people's skin, why this person looks different, what they're eating, why that smells funny, whatever language they use, we want to try and join them there and work through that conversation with them. They very much want to be respected and heard, and that's how we build that trust and open that dialogue for as they grow to continue having those kinds of conversations. Okay, Jill, I think we're ready. Oh wait, there was one more point on there. Sorry, it was covered up for me. The last one, and you don't have to flip back, Jill, is encouraging color awareness. And what that really is getting at is, again, this is exposure for your kids. Do you have books with multiracial people in it? Do you have toys and dolls that are of different races? Do we have, one of the things we're going to give away at the end tonight, we have a box of, and I think I have it sitting right here. I do. Crayola makes these fantastic Colors of the World crayons. I can't center it right on the camera. Having those available allows kids to explore what they see and express themselves in other ways other than words. So when you don't have the verbal ability, you still have the ability to express yourself. So I think now we're ready, Jill, for the next slide. And as we move through into preschool, one of the things that I kind of want to focus on is a concept called dialogic reading. And it sounds really complex, but it's really basic. When you read a book to a child, you want to go through and you want to read it the first time as it's written, as a story. And again, we want to go back to reading over and over and over again. It's not just a one and done thing. So the next time you pick up and you read the book, you want to start to include questions. You're going to let your child fill in what they see. What happens next? How does this make you feel? What do you think that little boy feels? What's your favorite color? So you want to kind of make it into a conversation instead of just you reading to the child. You're going to go back and forth. It's an inquiry-based kind of conversation. It allows the child to relate what they see in the book to their own experiences and kind of makes that into the beginnings of a discussion. I think, go ahead, Jill, and play our next little video clip. This next video clip is actually me reading to my daughter. She's in 2nd grade. So it's kind of an example of the dialogic reading and what we can do with that.
I am a story. So are you. So is everyone. My story begins the same way yours does. Take me, for example. I was born on January 27th, 1939 in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm kind of old, huh? When were you born?
February 25th.
Oh, there's something else that's part of my story. It's part of your stories, too. That's what race we are. I am black. That's the author. What race are you? And what do you see in that picture?
A white person, and I'm white.
Yes.
And so
I am white, too, but do you know that Mommy's great-grandmother and
Was
great-grandfather, they were not black, they were Mexican-American. So that makes them Hispanic.
wait,
None.
Is this Hispanic?
Yes, none of these stories are true, are they? What else do you see in this picture?
Hispanic, white, black, brown, Asian,
And what else do you see? Do you know what these are?
no, dollar symbols.
Money doesn't make us better than other people either.
Yeah.
It gives us more opportunities, but it doesn't make us better. Who was white, black, Hispanic, or Asian?
Oh, that would be that since back then people were treated differently from their color, so that would be good. So no one knows they were black or white.
Do you think people are still treated differently because of the color of their skin?
Some are?
Yeah. Do you think that's better than the way it used to be, or do you think that's the same?
Still the same a bit, but it's better than back then.
If you think about the person that happens to, do you think they feel like it's better than it was?
No.
No, it feels the same. I'll take off my skin. Will you take off yours?
No.
Do you know what he means by that?
No.
He means that he'll remove that as part of who he is, so you can get to know the real him. So that's Let's Talk About Race by Julius Lester.
No more books.
Okay, so at the tail end of that, I don't know if you heard what she said. She actually said to me, no more books. So that's kind of one of the things that we need to listen to our kids when we talk about letting them lead the discussion. That's a pretty long book. We only put in a little short clip. I think it took us probably about 7 minutes to read it. And by the end, and it's pretty in-depth conversation. I like it because the whole premise of the book is a conversation. It opens questions that as you read, you can ask your child, kind of like what you saw in the video, but it is a long book and it is a lot for them to take in. So she was telling me that she was done. She was done. She was ready to move on. And we need to listen to our kids when they kind of give us that message, because we don't want this to become something that they don't want to participate in. And again, one of the ways we can make sure we're keeping it developmentally appropriate is to let them lead. So we were done there. We finished up with that. What is important for the books that you choose at this age, we want to start getting our kids to think about what their story is. So who are they? What makes them an individual? Because we want to celebrate what makes us our own individual and what makes us different. Not just talking about difference in a negative light. We want to make sure that we stress that being different is a good thing. Being an individual is a good thing. And we really have to identify who we are. Equally important is listening to the stories of other people, which is what goes on in this book. Is the author is telling his story, but then he's also asking the children to reflect on their own stories and to tell their own stories. And that's important. So we need to identify with our kids who they are. They need to identify that and talk about what makes everybody the same and different. And that's not always something about skin color, race, religion. Sometimes that's a matter of, I like cats, this person likes dogs. What movies you like, what your favorite color is. All those things can play into helping kids define who they are and making conversations about race part of a normal everyday discussion. As you move a little bit further into the elementary age children, you can start to talk about what they see and what they hear. So they're going to go out into the world. They're going to start hearing things from other people. They're going to start seeing other things, and they're going to start having their own experiences separate from you. So you want to come back and talk about what they hear and how that makes them feel. You also want to make sure that you take opportunities as they get older to point out where you see racism, where you see injustice, so that there's an awareness that's going on. And that happens in books too. You can find one of the books that we put on the slide at the end is and the title is escaping me at the moment. Something about not just elephants. It's a book about a pet group. So you can bring your pets, except they're not letting elephants in. And so the boy who has a pet as an elephant isn't allowed in. And there's a lot of opportunities to talk about what it feels like to be part of a group, not part of a group, to be excluded and to be included. So those are the things that we want to make sure that we're talking to our kids about as they start going into that elementary age. And I think we can move to the next slide, Jill. Okay, so this one we're going to go over real quick because this sort of starts to blend into what Christine talked about with adults. Even though our kids start to become independent readers, it doesn't mean that we should stop reading with them and to them for as long as they will let us. Once they do stop letting us read to them, we can still take opportunities to talk about what they read and how that fits in with the world. The Read Woke Challenge is one of those places that's a really great opportunity for parents of older children and teens to have those conversations. Those books are books you can both read, and then it's not a book club and you don't have to sit down and treat it like that, but it gives you an opportunity to be viewing the same thing together and have a conversation about that. At this age, we really want to start encouraging that listening aspect. A huge part about raising an anti-racist child is to instill in them the ability to listen. You have to hear other people's stories too, not just your own. That's part of getting the empathy that you need to make meaningful change, which we move on to the identify and the act, which is what are the issues? What do they make me feel? And what can I do to become a change maker? So you want to find books that support that, that initiate those kind of conversations. And I put up here on the slide a couple of options. The Black Panther graphic novel and A Long Way Down, which is also available as a regular book. It's actually a poem by Jason Reynolds. Those are two opportunities. Not all kids are lovers of books, especially as they get older. Christine mentioned some of the books that are also available as movies. That's a great option. It doesn't have to be a traditional book. Long Way Down as a poem and on an audiobook is actually a really easy read, for lack of a better word, and a good opening. It's not long, and it's read by Jason Reynolds, so it's very well done, and there's an element of suspense that's involved that can keep non-readers engaged in a way that a book may not. And I think we can move to the last slide, Jill. So these are a couple more of the books that I mentioned, or Strictly No Elephants, that's the one I was trying to think of, that I've read through that I really think provide great opportunities for conversations with our kids. A is for Activists actually comes usually in a board book. It's also available as a picture book. It is essentially an alphabet book, an ABC book, just like Anti-Racist Baby is actually a counting book. The vocabulary in A is for Activists is fantastic to move into that toddler and elementary age for giving kids the vocabulary they need to have these conversations.
Oh, excuse me, Erin.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention, we will be sending everybody who's registered a list of all of these books.
Okay, fantastic. Then I'm not going to go through them all. They're up there on the slide. We're going to have the list. And that kind of brings me to the end. I really hope that what you take away from all of this is the concept that we don't have all the answers. We are going to make missteps along the way, but talking about racism and social justice with the children in your life and incorporating some of these practices into your life, if that feels awkward and intentional, don't let that hold you back from starting this journey. Our kids need to keep listening, asking, and seeking out ways to have these, well, we need to with our kids to have these conversations. And so that's kind of the overview of everything we covered. I'm going to, on that note, turn everything over to our guests tonight, and they're going to talk about all the really amazing things here in St. Mary's County that give you more opportunities to have those conversations. So I think that we go to Karen.
Oh, yeah, there's just, yep. Let me just mention this one real quick.
Oh, okay.
Here's a map of our wonderful county. There's so much out here, and this is not everything. We have others. This is what we're going to talk about tonight. So we do have pictures. I'll let each of our guests explain. We're going to start with Karen. You can advance the slide, please, Jill.
Thank you, Jill. The first stop for the Museum Division section is at the Drayton African American Schoolhouse. This is a real special place because unlike so many other one-room schoolhouses, this one has never been altered. and it's never been moved. So it's in its original location where it served the Drayton community from the 1890s up into the 1940s. It's open this month on Saturdays, but it is not open on a regular basis because it is very far removed from everything else. But you can always call to make an arrangement to go for a tour there. It is free, but as you can see in the slide, there are interpretive panels outside, and these tell a really nice story of the struggle that the African Americans in Drayton and in St. Mary's County went through to get educated until schools were desegregated. Some of the words on the panels are the words of the students that actually attended school there. So it's a really nice, real place where you can hear the words of real people. And the library's got some good books too that focus on Drayton if you want some background before you go as a parent in Relentless Pursuit of Education is one that specifically deals with this. Inside the school, it's set up the way it was when there were students there. So you see the desks in the right-hand slide. And so some of the things that you can talk about with your student or with your children, is why were the schools segregated? Why do they think they were segregated? Why didn't everybody go to school all together? And also talk about the fact that it's a one-room schoolhouse, which means all the grades are together. It's not a racism kind of question, but it starts a conversation about what is a one-room schoolhouse. And whites went to one-room schoolhouses too, just like the blacks did. So it gets you started on thinking about the education. And if your children are in school, they can look in the windows and see the difference between their schoolroom and this schoolroom. There are some similarities. There's a flag flying up there. There are blackboards, there are desks, but there's a stove and there's a lot of other strange looking things in there too. And a lot of things that are missing. There are not a lot of books, not a lot of maps, no whiteboards, computers, or anything like that. So you can start a lot of conversations here at the schoolhouse on a lot of different topics at a lot of different age levels. Can I have the next slide, please? The old jail museum is in the center of Leonardtown, and it's open 7 days a week from noon to 4. And it tells a couple of interesting stories. It housed runaway slaves that had been recaptured and were being held before they were returned to their masters. It also held some abolitionists, both white and African American, that had helped the freedom seekers running away. Also, it tells the story of a lynching victim, the only documented lynching victim in St. Mary's County. And there's an exhibit about him in the cell that he was held in. It tells a lot of different stories on a lot of different levels. So you may not want to talk about lynching with your young ones, but you can go in and look at the cells. They're on the second floor, and the cells are segregated. Blacks on one side of the hall, whites on the other side of the hall. But the whites were also segregated by sex. So there's 2 cells, a white women's cell and a white man's cell. On the other side, it's just one big cell. So what does that tell you about what was going on then? What does that make the children think about? And talking about the freedom seekers, how did they feel when they got recaptured? How do you think the masters felt when they got their slave back? How did they treat them? How do you think the people felt that were helping the freedom seekers and got arrested? You know, is your child willing to risk being jailed for a cause like these people were? Again, not a good topic for little ones, but as your children get older, you can delve deeper and deeper into here. Like at Drayton, there's an interpretive panel outside that talks some about the jail, but it also talks about some things in Leonardtown. It talks about a different kind of ill will. There's a story about the one man in the county that voted for Abraham Lincoln and what happened to him. No, he wasn't being abused because he was a different race, but he was a different political party and had different ideas that way. So that's another way of looking at differences and that sort of thing. To just be very simple in the jail, you can just talk about what a jail is and who goes to jail and why. And in this particular jail, the jailer lived on the first floor. So you can talk about that too, what it was like to live in the jail and how did they feel maybe about what was going on and who they were holding in the jails, in the cells. So there's a lot of interesting stories that can be told there. The biggest one is as part of the Underground Railroad, but it's the story of the Underground Railroad that we don't tend to talk about. It's about the people that didn't succeed, the people that didn't make it to freedom, but who were caught and brought back. And that is open, like I said, 7 days a week, noon to 4. So you can go in there anytime, and it's free as well. All right, the next slide, please. Freedom Park and the U.S. Colored Troops Memorial is part of the Recreation and Parks Division, but there's not specifically a museum there. It's in Lancaster Park, down in Lexington Park, opposite the Naval Air Station and very close to the Lexington Park Library, actually. The monument there was erected as a way to remind people of the contributions that African Americans in St. Mary's County have made. So if you go to the monument, there are panels all around the bottom of it. And so you can read about the different contributors and the way some of the inventions, some of the things that authors and writings that have been done by folks. And also can learn about the shape of the monument, which is a nice tactile experience for little ones to talk about the rocks and where the rocks came from. But it represents the climb that the African Americans have made in St. Mary's County and the things that they have accomplished. Very near here, also in Lancaster Park, is the U.S. Colored Troops Memorial. And so that's a whole nother conversation that can be had about African-American soldiers and when they earned the right to participate as soldiers in the Civil War. And if you want to dig further, you can go back to the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 in St. Mary's County and learn about what happened with enslaved people then and how they were offered their freedom by the British. And sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't work. So there's lots and lots of, again, stories there. And between the two, there is a series of interpretive panels again. So you can go along and read about the Medal of Honor winners that were part of the U.S. Colored Troops in St. Mary's County and a whole variety of different aspects. So a lot of reading at this site, but definitely worth the visit. And it's open just dawn to dusk like all the rest of the parks in the county. So you can go visit anytime, go back many times, read a different panel each time, talk about something different each time. But it's, again, a place that is not often visited. And I think people drive by it and don't realize it's there and don't spend the time to find out what it's all about and what it represents and who put it together. So you should definitely go there and take a look at that too. We also have some just information at the old jail in Leonardtown because it is also a visitor center. So we have some brochures about all these sites. We have an African American history tour brochure that will take you to all the sites, churches as well that were very important to the African American community and the early schools. So if you just want more information to learn where else to go, the Old Jail Museum is a good place to stop to get information, as is Historic St. Mary City and all the other museums. We've all got the brochures, but that's about that.
Oh, that's great. Jill, don't advance just 1 minute. I wanted to mention, speaking as someone who has logged many hours at the playgrounds around the county, that all 3 of these sites are close to playgrounds. The Drayton School is about 5 minutes from Cecil Park down in Drayton. And the old jailhouse, you can walk down to the wharf and there's a playground down there. And this last one is inside Lancaster Park, which has a fantastic playground and there are lots of sports fields. So these are things that you may not take a trip like specifically to just do that, but you can work it in with something that you're already doing. And you have the little carrot of the playground. You know, we're gonna just stop here real quick and do that, and then go do something else. So you can fit it in ways like that. So thank you so much, Karen. I appreciate it. And the museum division has some great things to offer, and a great resource at the old jail to find out more information. Okay, thanks. Bill, if you could please advance the slide. Thank you, Karen. And we'll move on to Dr. Coleman to talk about the commemorative to the enslaved peoples.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah, we're very excited about the commemorative to enslaved peoples. This site was recently unveiled late last year, November 21st, I believe it was. It was a Saturday. It was a really big virtual unveiling with many guest speakers. And the story behind this is, I will spend a little bit of time just talking about the story, because we did not wake up as a college at St. Mary's one morning and say, let's build a commemorative to enslaved peoples. And this background might be helpful to you with respect to talking to this about your children. But what happened was that we were set to build a new athletic complex right off Mattaponi Road near the college. And during an architectural dig, which we had to conduct by state law because we're on historic property, it was discovered by a colleague of mine in anthropology, Julie King, and her some of her student workers, that there were remnants found that were evidence of that there were slave families that lived there. And to make a long story short, there were 2 to 3 families had lived on this property, on this field. And so this was back in 2016. So this has been a long-term project, and President Jordan, Tawanda Jordan, put together a committee to explore ways in which we could acknowledge our findings and to commemorate the enslaved peoples of Southern Maryland. And after many committee meetings, after getting input from the campus community, the local community in St. Mary's County, even other members of Southern Maryland, larger community even, and alumni and things of that nature, faculty and staff as well. We brought in a few architectural firms, and in the end, Recite, this firm that we ended up going with, built the structure, and this was part of their presentation. And one reason that we were very impressed with this cabin, and it's basically a rendering of a slave cabin, is that it was very, they did their research with respect to St. Mary's College of Maryland and St. Mary's County in Southern Maryland. And a lot of their presentation dealt with words and images that came directly from documents related to the county. And it was clear that they had a deep respect for not only the documents that they researched, but also the lives of the individuals, the enslaved people of Southern Maryland. And so, as I said earlier, in November, the site was unveiled. And the way we like to think about this site is that we think it's an opportunity for people in the community to start a dialogue about the institution of slavery. And as Karen said, it's not a very these are not easy topics to address. And depending on the age of your child, of course, or the age of your children, you can, it depends on how in depth you would like to go. But one of the really good things about this commemorative is that you can really appreciate it just as a work of art, the architecture of it, the mirrored panels, for example, the words on it, which is basically called erasure poetry. And what that basically means is that the words that are included on the mirrored panels of the cabin are words that were found in newspapers of the day, advertisements for runaway slaves, historical documents relating to the area, and especially about the slave period here in St. Mary's County. And you can read those and discuss some of the words and the way the words connect to each other, or maybe don't connect to each other because there are parts that are missing. So it can be appreciated just as for its aesthetic value, depending on the age of your kid, of course. Or if you really want to go further into the institution of slavery and the history of slavery, again, depending on your child's age and temperament, one way to do it is to, can we forward the slide, please? Thank you, Jim. One way we can get into it is talk about how the enslaved demonstrated resilience, perseverance, and always there was within that community a sense of hope that freedom would one day come to them. So when you think about the enslaved peoples of Southern Maryland, one way to get into a conversation with your children and even with your peers, your fellow adults, is to not only focus on the institution for its negative aspects, and I think we're all familiar with most of those, but from the perspective of the enslaved themselves, and how much determination and willpower and resilience it took for generations of enslaved families to survive a horrific institution such as slavery. So there's no desire here to sugarcoat the institution, but at the same time, again, depending on your children's temperament and their ages, there are ways you can enter into a dialogue or a conversation or a discussion about slavery without, I guess, devolving into all of the traditional horrors of the institution. That can come later when they're mature enough to handle it. And also, if you look at the slide here, these are nighttime slides, of course, and this is how the commemorative illuminates from the inside out at nighttime. And technically speaking, the college has said that the commemorative is available for viewing from sun up to sundown, but it's also situated near the athletic complex that we set out to build initially, and there are athletic events at night. So, and you have to pass the commemorative in order to access the stadium. So, while officially we don't really want people milling about a great deal after sundown, just for safety and security purposes, if there are events planned in that area, you can feel free to come by, or you could always drive by at night as well, just to see how the cabin looks at night. It really is an amazing piece of art in its own right, but the story behind it and how it came to be I think is also quite fascinating. Next slide, please, Jill. And this is just another angle of the cabin from the posterior of the commemorative. And also with how you can access or visit the site if you're using GPS. And one of the last things that I'd just like to say is that it is the newest of the sites that we'll discuss tonight. And not a lot of people have seen it, unfortunately. I mean, we have students who are not on campus. They haven't been here since last March, since spring break, almost a whole year now. And they've seen photographs basically, but we do hope that when things return to normal, that we get a lot of foot traffic in this area, and that the discussion about the history of this commemorative can be ongoing and widespread. And again, the way you can enter into this dialogue about a very disturbing and difficult topic is by pointing out some of the, not necessarily positive per se, but there are different perspectives that you can use in order to have an entree into a constructive discussion. Because what so often happens with American history when we're dealing with difficult topics is that we tend to tense up, and we tend to either go on an offensive or defensive when it comes to especially racially charged discussions in this country. And I've never thought that that was a constructive mode to fall in. And I've also always thought that there's no reason why, as a country, that we need to sweep anything under the rug. All you have to do is say, as a country, we've been growing and evolving since our inception. We've made mistakes, some more severe than others, and that's who we were, and this is who we would like to be today. And so let's talk about how we can get there. And that's another way to think about the commemorative to enslaved peoples.
Yes, it is nice when we have something that we can look at and, just to acknowledge what went on.
Precisely.
You can't really heal from something if you aren't willing to talk about it or to accept that it even happened. So I think it's great that we have things like this. And this has gotten national attention. Like I saw it on other news feeds. So hopefully more people will be able to come visit. And actually, I took my kids on a hike. There's a really nice hike by historic St. Mary's City that you can get to from the visitor center parking lot. And after we did that hike, we stopped and looked at this because it's very close by. So it's a thing you can combine with something else that you're doing in the area. And it's really stunning. Like you feel different when you're standing there. So yes. Thank you for all your work that you've done on it.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you for having us here.
Oh, you bet. Okay, and now we would like to talk to Peter Friesen, who is the Education Director at Historic St. Mary's City. There is so much to offer at Historic St. Mary's City. So Peter, let's see what we have to talk about tonight.
All right, well, thank you everyone. And time's a little short, so I'll try to be quick. But the Historic St. Mary's City, for people who might not know, is on the site of Maryland's first capital city. This is where the first colonists arrived, and it's the actual grounds that many of these important events took place that shaped the ideas of race in our country today. This is the meeting ground of three groups of people from three different continents, where we're all coming together by force, by choice, and with various results. You have English coming over from Europe. You have the Piscataway, the Yakamako people who've been living here for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and various groups of people from the continent of Africa who were forced to come here to work the land that the English took from the native people. And so it gives an opportunity to talk about race in a multifaceted way and how it shaped our country. We also tell the nice story of religious toleration, and can also talk about how political and religious differences can impact our views of each other. But for the purposes of this conversation, I'll focus on race. And here we have highlighted some of our sites that do focus on those aspects that deal with enslavement and freedom. And we also do have a Native American village that you can go and learn more about the Native American experience and help people, especially a lot of people are surprised to find out that the Piscataway Nation is still here in Maryland, and they do exist. And some of the things to think about when thinking about race and where we are, to help give people an understanding of differences, like some of these books talked about, like using words and pictures and colors, is names of places. And it's really exciting to know that one of the oldest roads in Maryland is the Native American road, Mattaponi Road, which is right next to both historic St. Mary's City and St. Mary's College of Maryland, where the Shrine to the Enslaved is. So that's another important thing to think about. Chesapeake Bay, Potomac River, raccoon, opossum are all Native American words. So we want to keep those in mind as well. But I'll focus on a few of our examples of places you can visit the museum to better understand these concepts for your children of all ages, and for yourself. You can come and have nice conversations. And our main focus is the 17th century or the 1600s, but we do have things that tie in with the 1800s and the 1900s as well. So it's good to keep that in mind. If we can go to the next slide. This is the St. John's Site Museum. This museum is a little island. It is owned by Historic St. Mary's City, but it is inside the college campus. So you'd have to drive up College Drive from Route 5 to get there. And this is a modern exhibit hall built on top of a 17th century building. And so you can see the foundations for the 17th century building. There's even artifacts here of evidence of humans living on this spot for thousands of years with fire-cracked rocks. So it's a testament to the Native American population. What's really unique, though, about St. John's is it allows us to talk about the story, and this is really good for some of your older children, is understanding how race and the idea of race changed in the 17th century, and how people made choices to develop a system of labor that, even though people had to use slavery for thousands of years, to suddenly turn it into something that's only a certain group of people of a certain race would be enslaved. And one story that talks about this early transition is a man named Matthias De Souza, who was the first documented man of African descent in the colony, who was an indentured servant, received his freedom, and was also able to participate in the legislature. We have records of him participating when people met to make laws. They met at this building at St. John's very early on, when the colony was more of a direct democracy than it was a representative government. And that's really fascinating that this man of African descent, he was labeled a mulatto, which at that time is a word to mean somebody who's mixed African and European heritage. So definitely of African descent. But they didn't view him any different and allowed him to be there and participate in law. But very shortly after that, this property changes hands to another person named Simon Overzee, who was a Dutchman who was very much involved in the slave trade. And he enslaved African people and Native American people. And we have documentation of that here. And we also have documentation of one of the people that he enslaved, who unfortunately we do not know his actual name, the name he called himself, the name that his friends and family would have called him, because he was stolen from Africa and given a European name, Antonio. He was sold to this Dutchman who made him work on this plantation here. And he resisted and resisted and resisted to the point where Simon had to murder him. Or didn't have to murder him, but did murder him. And was brought up on charges. And this are just two, I think, striking stories of the juxtaposition of how quickly a person's mindset and a society's mindset can change of one group being accepted to not being accepted. How quickly our freedom is there and can be taken away. And so this is a great place, I think, to take your older children, teenagers, middle schoolers, to talk about this and other people. Next slide, please. Here, this is the Mackel Barn. This is one of the oldest structures on the property at Historic St. Mary's City. It was built just after the American Revolution. It was mainly used as a granary or a place to store grain or tobacco. But this is a place where many people of African descent or African Americans who were enslaved on the Broom Howard, on the Mackel plantation, the Broom plantation, and then eventually the Broom Howard plantation would have worked. And it stands in the exact spot it used to be, or not used to be, where it was originally built, excuse me. And we've turned it into an exhibit where we talk about the agriculture, but then talk about who worked here. And there's an example of one of the text panels. And what's really unique about this is we have a list of the names, and I always like to bring people in here and show them the names and have people say the names out loud. Because when you say someone's name out loud, it humanifies, makes them human and gives them their person. And so it makes you wonder what their life would have been like, what it was like for them. And the next, I always ask, so when you go and you take your children, find the oldest person on the list and find the youngest person on the list. And it shows our family. It shows our grandparents, and it shows our younger brothers and sisters, or representations of them, right? That these were actual families who lived here and were separated and struggled through this. And also what this talks about is, again, not always about the dark side that Jeff talked about, but the positive side, where people try to take their freedom in their own hands. So this is a place where, not too many are familiar with that, when the British came during the War of 1812, several people left with the British, took up arms against their masters to get their freedom. And we have documentation of this, and we talk about it in this exhibit. And these people were guaranteed their freedom by the English, and those who joined the English were resettled in other places. So that's another really interesting story we can talk about. And next, we'll go on to the next part of the century. So next slide. This is the Struggle for Freedom exhibit. And here is an actual structure that was built to house enslaved people. This building was built in the 1840s or 50s time period for the Broom Howard plantation. So the people who were working in that barn would have been living in this building. So you can actually take your family to see this in real life and see what it would have looked like on the inside. But this structure is more than just the story of the oppressed, but to me, it is a place of reflection, a place to remember perseverance and the struggle for freedom, that people are always wanting something better. And this structure was a home to African Americans from the 1840s all the way to the 1960s. And so we have this exhibit set up in three facets, where when we're looking at it, you can see the gentleman here standing by the text panel. That's Dr. Brock. He did a lot of the research, the archaeological research, and wrote his dissertation on this. And then we used his dissertation to write this exhibit. On the left side of the building, we focus on the time of enslavement, what it was like for people who were enslaved. And we don't know exactly who lived in this building at that time. We just don't have those records. On the right side of the building, we jump forward to the 1880s, 1890s. That time period where Karen talked about where the schoolhouses were being built for African Americans. And we know that the Broom Howard family tried to even have a schoolhouse built on one of their properties down at the end of the Mattapani Road to help encourage his former enslaved people to not leave, because he's giving them opportunity to get education. But really for him, it's selfish because he wants to labor. But so you can talk about these dynamics with your family and your children of why people do certain things. But then you can also see how people have tried to improve the house, do things that they couldn't have done before, such as putting in a wood floor as opposed to a dirt floor, putting glass in the windows as opposed to just an empty hole in the wall. And then on the back side is a shed that was added in the 20th century. And a woman named Emma Hall grew up in this house, and many of her descendants she lived there for quite a long time with her father. Her father was a caretaker there. Emma Hall ended up working at St. Mary's College as a housekeeper. And she gave a lot of oral history about what it was like living there in the 20th century. And in that back area, we have some audio files that you can listen to of Emma talking about what life was like for her and her experiences. and their struggle to have better equality in the early 20th century. And so what we have at Historic St. Mary's City is a full story of what happens with race in our society and how our ancestors made certain choices to put people in certain categories based on skin color, and creating this concept of race that is kind of man-made, actually. And we can talk about all of those different facets over the last 400 years at our facility. And we will be opening on March 26th this year, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Tuesday through Saturday. And the two main exhibits that I discussed, the St. John's Site Museum and the Struggle for Freedom exhibit, are open to the public and are free. The rest of the museum we do offer tickets for. Right now, while we're closed, if you want, you can find our contact information on our website and set up an appointment. So if you really want to come and check it out and we have time, we'll go ahead and open it for you to come check it out. So that's what we have to offer at Historic St. Mary's City. Thank you.
I love St. Mary's City. I've gotten to chaperone a few fourth grade field trips there, and it's just fantastic. There's so much, and I hope everyone gets a chance to go visit. Okay, last, we just want to mention, we'll be doing this probably tomorrow morning, but we do have a prize giveaway for everyone who registered. We'll be drawing some names, and what you're going to get is a book bundle. It'll be one of the adult books that we talked about and one of the children's books, plus the crayon package that we talked about, Colors of the World, that have all the different skin tones in it. So we are going to be doing that drawing, and we will notify the lucky winners who get that. I just want to thank all of our panelists. We have so many great things to offer around the county, and it's good. A lot of times when it's in your own backyard, you never get around to doing it. So we want to take that step. So tonight we talked about all the books that are in my background right here. It's what you can do inside your home, but then step outside your door and go take advantage of what we've got. So thank you all so much for being with us tonight, and my panelists, and also all of you who stayed with us and used some of your valuable time to find out about this. So thank you all for coming to our library program, and good night.